Just a week after the 11,400 crore rupee fraud at the Punjab National Bank came to light, the finance minister has broken his silence. Speaking at an event in the capital, Arun Jaitley held the management of the bank, its auditors and the regulator, the Reserve Bank, responsible for the fraud allegedly perpetrated by Nirav Modi and his associate companies. In a scathing indictment of the then PNB management, the finance minister said, and I quote, that they have been found wanting. He went on to question the role of both the internal as well as external auditors, questioning, and I quote again, what were they doing? He also trained his guns at the regulator, that is the Reserve Bank of India, saying that the Reserve Bank should introspect. Listen in to the finance minister.
The first important question is with regard to the lack of ethics that a section of Indian business follows. And therefore it is incumbent on us as a state, till the last legitimate capacity of the state, to really chase these people to the last possible conclusion to make sure that the country is not cheated. When authority is given to the managements, you are expected to utilize that authority effectively and in the right manner. And therefore a question for the managements itself is, were they found lacking? And on the face of it, the answer seems to be, yes, they were. They were found also lacking in being able to check who amongst them were the delinquents itself. The third important question is, which is addressed to our friends in the profession, what are our auditors doing? There is also an important challenge where the supervisory agencies have now to introspect as to what are the additional mechanisms they have to put into place to make sure that stray cases don't become a pattern again. I say this because these kind of developments have a cost to the country and a cost to the taxpayer. It's a direct cost. And it has an indirect cost which impinges on development, which impinges upon the lending capacity of banks as an institution, and therefore it obviously impinges upon developmental finance.
Well, that was the finance minister raising several important questions that require some answers. I'm Shireen Bhan, and joining me on the show today, R.K. Bakshi, former Executive Director, Bank of Baroda, presently the Senior Advisor at Centrum Capital, Rohan Sachdev, Leader, Financial Services Advisory at EY India, Africa and the Middle East, and Vihang Virkar, Partner at PDS Legal. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the show. Mr. Bakshi, let me start by asking you, and I want to pick up on the point that the finance minister raised there. The Reserve Bank of India late last night put out a clarification, or at least an assertion, stating that it had raised the issue of the SWIFT system being manipulated thrice in 2016 confidentially with banks. I had Mr. Mundra here on my program say very categorically that he had raised the issue of the SWIFT being misused in September of 2016 as well. And yet we find ourselves in this position. I mean, the whole fraud, alleged fraud in Punjab National Bank seems to have been about SWIFT misuse. Where does the fault lie then? Do you believe that the Reserve Bank has to do some serious answering and some serious introspection, as the finance minister pointed out, on why the lapses with respect to the SWIFT system have gone unnoticed?
Thank you, Shireen. System upgrade is a continuous process. RBI and Mr. Mundra pointed out in his speech, and RBI says that they issued 3 directives to the banks to upgrade their systems, and I really do not know what are the contents of those cautionary directions. But system upgrade, and one thing that is coming out, that SWIFT system should not be a standalone system. It should better be integrated with the core banking, so that anything can flow to SWIFT only after it has been input into the core banking, which is a double entry bookkeeping system, and therefore it affects the balance sheet, and it is known to everybody, auditors, the management and outsiders. Now, the upgrade, even if it is decided, it takes some time. It is possible that the core banking version is not supporting that integration, so you have to go for another version, which in public sector banks will involve.
No, Mr. Bakshi, I understand that. I understand that, and maybe it's not fair to ask this question of you, but what I'm trying to understand is that if the Reserve Bank says that it did in 2016 thrice send out cautionary advisories to banks, asking them to upgrade the SWIFT system, warning them about possible misuse of the SWIFT system, then why in 2018, sir, are we talking about Punjab National Bank and 11,400 crores of a fraud which was allegedly perpetrated on the back of misuse of the SWIFT system? So between 2016 and 2018, with all of the caution that the Reserve Bank threw at banks, what did the Reserve Bank do?
So Reserve Bank, I again will say I do not really know what were the directions, what did they contain, and if they asked for this integration to be achieved, and I do not know, RBI may have followed with the banks as to what are the steps being taken, but a reasonable amount of time has to be given for getting those tenders in place and seeing the cost of it and all. But it generally, it's a very sad thing to have happened, but the fact is that operational risk in the way it was when we joined the bank in 70s, the operational risk, which is just a combination of the systems and practices being made so foolproof that nobody can break into them. Now systems have gone into IT, so IT systems and should be there, but manual systems should not be forgotten, because human beings ultimately continue to be a very important link in the entire thing. Even if integration is there, many systems. Now in this case, for example, in SWIFT there is a message 199, which is a free format, which is like writing a letter. I do not know whether even in where systems are integrated, even then that message can be sent. And I think many of these messages, LOUs have gone on that, because there is no format, to my mind, which is strictly for LOUs in that. So misuse, operational risk. It has to be, can be controlled.
No, I understand that, sir, but I understand that there is, of course, human intervention that is crucial in all of these matters. But let me, before I get to the other panelists, and again, we're trying to understand this, and I'm sure the viewers are trying to understand it as well. I had the counsel for Nirav Modi, Vijay Agarwal, tell me yesterday that this business that nobody in Punjab National Bank, besides the two junior officials, knew about this is bunkum, because if there was all of this money that was flowing through the Nostro account, then PNB cannot claim that it had no knowledge of these transactions. Can you explain to us how that works and whether this argument presented by Nirav Modi's lawyer holds any water?
So again, I'll say that I really do not have the details as to once the money came into Nostro account, how did it go out. But I can think that, Nostro account is, the reconciliation is at the core of many things of banking frauds. And whether it was unreconciled entries in the Reserve Bank or State Bank account of banks, or whether it is unreconciled entry in interbranch transactions, or whether it is unreconciled entries in the Treasury Nostro accounts. Now it is possible that the day the credit was going into the Nostro account through the discounting bank, discounting the LOU, the same day either the original instruction said that please credit Punjab National Bank such and such branch for further credit to customer ABC, in which case a credit will come to Nostro and it will straight away, there will be a credit and there will be a debit going to the customer's account. Or those who were misusing the SWIFT, they might be sending a message on the same day that this money which is coming, any money coming into the Nostro has to be applied somewhere. Either PNB is borrowing, that it is for their own account, other it has to be applied. Either that application message is contained in the original message, or there is a separate message. In which case there will be a $10 million credit and a $10 million debit. All banks have put their reconciliation of Nostro on auto reconciliation, electronic reconciliation, in which case the entries will get matched. And then only very small entries remain outstanding, which then get manual intervention.
Time for us to head into a break, but when we return, we continue our discussion on the lessons to be learned from the PNB fraud. Welcome back. You're watching Eye on India. We're in conversation with three experts on the lessons to be learnt from the fraud at Punjab National Bank. Rohan Sachdev, let me come to you now. And, the question is, and I'm looking at a piece, and thanks to Manas Chakravarti for putting the data together, Punjab National Bank's defaulter list has not just, clients from the jewellery side, but particularly some of the big defaulters are from the jewellery side, whether it's Winsome Diamond and Jewellers or Forever Precious Jewellery and Diamond. I mean, in fact, PNB has the highest number of willful defaulters as well as the largest amount outstanding from these accounts. This is the data that's been put together by Manas Chakravarti. So that begs the question then, as the Finance Minister was also pointing out, where were the auditors? What exactly was going on for several years?
So I think, Shireen, let's just step back and see what happens in an ideal control environment. You have three lines of control that should be there. The first is the business controls. The second is the framework that you create around your governance and compliance. And the third is the extended assurance, which is the internal audit or the concurrent audit function. And I think what's happened over here is that we don't know the details of the case absolutely, but what's happened is I think there have been issues at each level. I think the whole governance framework could have been structured in a different manner. So if you look at some of the newer private banks or the foreign banks, the trade functions are more centralized, whereas this is more decentralized. So there is, there is access to systems which are sitting at the branch levels, which doesn't happen in the modern day banks. Then I think the second function, what has happened over here is I think certain basic tests haven't been carried out in terms of the reconciliation between. So the access to the switch system was there, and at the same time there was no recording in the core banking system. Now if someone was doing an audit, probably what people often do is they go and see which controls are existing and they tick those. But ideally you should be thinking which controls should exist and how do you challenge that ecosystem of the controls that are not existing. So I think that could be one possibility that wasn't there. But I think as a go forward, I think, Shireen, one thing that really needs to be done over here is to start looking at how do you create the three lines of controls. And I think as Mr. Bakshi said, a lot of banks have historically focused on credit and market risk, but operational risk is becoming more and more relevant. So, putting that focus on operational risk is one thing. Creating your three lines of defense is the next step that you will need to do. Creating a proper governance framework and structure of reporting is what you will need to also do over there. And then I think you've got to go back to the age-old top-down, bottom-up, top-down approach of looking at your risks and how do you identify the risks. And when I say top-down, I mean that you've got to look at how is the framework set up. Bottom-up is look at all the processes and the controls running through the processes. And then top-down again is identifying the risks that matter, and then saying, how do I control these as I get reported? I think second thing that is there is there needs to be a lot more technology intervention that happens. I think there's been a lot of manual work that's happening. You put in technology, you start putting in analytics in today's world, you start putting in blockchain in today's world, there's complete transparency and there is an ability for things to be reported out to you on an ongoing basis. Third, I would say is to your point, I would say is the point to you, the question you raised is I think on the internal audit front, I think yes, there needs to be a lot more rigor in there, and I think there needs to be the whole dynamic planning of what you look at, and situations change on an ongoing basis. So how do you plan your audits, and how do you create this extended assurance to be more effective, and how do you go back and look at what's happened and reported to remediate is also important.
All right, Vihang, let me come to you now. From a legal perspective, what is it that we need to keep in mind? What should banks now keep in mind, given what is transpired at Punjab National Bank? What are the lessons to be learned?
Well, I think, thanks, Shireen. Firstly, there are a number of lessons to be learned. There are lessons to be learned by borrowers. There's lessons to be learned by the lenders. There's lessons to be learned by the employees at the lender's place as well. So a general atmosphere which is conducive to compliance is, I think, paramount in a financial system that is sound. In addition to that, documentation which ensures that the risk is allocated at the right place, whether it is with the bank, whether it is with the borrower, or whether it is with the discounting on the counterparty bank. All of these risks are appropriately documented, or should be appropriately documented. Once that is set in place, I think what has been missed out in this case more than anything else is not really the fact that the documentation was inadequate. But the fact that the documentation which was supposed to have been put in place wasn't signed or executed or implemented at all. So, you know, ordinarily, once you have an LC issued, a bank would do, you know, the first step before issuing an LC would be that they would have either 100% margin against which the LC is issued. If not 100% margin, at least a working capital facility with an adequate security package. In this case, these basic checks which have to be done before issuing a letter of credit or a letter of undertaking were missing. So I think that is one of the consequences that, you know, is a lesson to be learned really in how these issues or situations can be managed. As of now, as facts are emerging and we're all sort of trying to understand what the implications will be, but the consequences on the employees are obviously going to be severe if they are you know, found to have been involved in fraud, because there could be obviously criminal cases against them. They could be once convicted, you know, and charge sheeted with, you know, fraud, forgery, cheating, etc.
Which is the case that the investigative agencies are making at this point.
Oh, absolutely. And as I would see that, you know, more and more facts come, you know, before us, it's not going to be limited to these 3 or 4 sections of the IPC. There's going to be various other acts as well. So there's going to be the Foreign Exchange Management Act. Was money issued or was external commercial borrowing extended to a gentleman who was an NRI? Is that the first question? The second question is the same LC allowed to be renewed over and over for 7 years, or when the ordinary time frame for an LC is between 3 to 6 months, or maybe 1 year in extreme cases. So all of these issues will be seen as and when, you know, facts arise. There'll also be issues under the Information Technology Act. Was there a breach of the systems that the bank had employed? Was there a you know, data compliance issue? So all of these issues, as they come about, will sort of, you know, throw more and more offences for people to take care of. But having said that, I think
absolutely, and several of those have already been noted in this case, whether it's the rolling over of the LOUs, you know, the legal argument now being presented by those that have been arrested by the investigating agencies are that we haven't signed anything, so we shouldn't be the ones behind bars. But Mr. Bakshi, let's talk about the road ahead now, sir. And I go back to the Reserve Bank yesterday, because not just that clarification on 2016, the SWIFT misuse, it's also now set up a committee under Mr. Malegaam to look at two issues. One is this issue of divergence, and the other is also the technology aspect to which you've already alluded to. What do you make of that, and what is it that you believe is the need of the hour? I mean, we had the PJ Nayak committee give significant recommendations, sir, yet we're talking about these issues today in 2018. What is the expectation and the ask now of the Malegaam committee, for instance?
So the ask is as given in the mandate. One is the divergence issue, because I think that is earlier must have been decided, and now fraud issue has also been added to it. Lot of divergences have been found between the banks as they declared their NPAs, and when audited by the regulator, they found some divergences. All said and done, the divergences found so far around 40,000 crore, which is around 0.5% of the total loan book, or in an NPA of 10% or whatever. But ideally, to present an integrity of accounts, there should not be any divergence, and the bank's accounts, when presented and audited by the auditors, should present a true and fair picture. So I think the whole divergence issue is arising because of different interpretations of the same terms by the regulator and the banks.
Very quickly, I'll give both Rohan and Vihang a minute each. Rohan, I'll start by asking you, in terms of the next steps, you talked about blockchain, etc., from a technology perspective. You know, priority that the government, the Reserve Bank, as well as the banking industry needs to focus on?
So I think it's I would say first thing is the corporate governance around the banking in the public sector needs to be looked at very seriously. Adherence to corporate governance, and then building the governance framework and applying that on an ongoing basis, I think will be very, very important from my perspective. And I think the committee that has been set up, that's one part of their agenda also, is to look at, you know, the extended assurance that is provided and how they enforce that.
Okay, Vihang?
Well, I think, two things. Firstly is I think, as Rohan earlier pointed out, the decentralized functions of banks, which should probably be brought within the CBS or the core banking system, so that they're identified and issues and frauds of this sort or misdemeanors of this sort are brought to fore right in the beginning, as opposed to waiting for several years. And secondly, an atmosphere that is conducive to corporate governance, compliance should be seeped in the culture of the organization. It should be right from the top to the bottom. Everyone should have enough training, enough recognition of the consequence of their actions on the bank, on themselves, and the trade at large. So long as this consequence is well brought out, and explained to employees, my hope is that these sort of instances would reduce.
All right, gentlemen, we will have to leave it there. There are many questions that remain unanswered, and we are hoping that we will get to the bottom of how this fraud has been perpetrated and what are the lessons to be learnt. This is not the first, and hopefully this should be the last, at least, of the kind of scams that we've gotten so used to here within the banking system. But for now, thanks very much for your time, and thank you very much for joining us on Eye on India. We will leave it there. From all of us here, goodbye. Thanks for watching.